If you were not here last week but are here this week, just get around. Great, well, welcome. I'll kind of quickly walk back. You saw, for those of you who kind of came early, I take it that there was I came in, some of the slides from last week were playing, so you'll get a kind of sense of what we were talking about. And then this week kind of digging into some of the tools we're going to be using for the business development. For those of you who were last week, hopefully you were able to absorb some of that. I know that we went through really fast. We apologized for the class being at such a fast pace. As I mentioned, that's normally takes place over a much longer time period, but we wanted to give you kind of a sense of kind of the whole design and design thinking process. Before you can put things into your fingertips, you got to kind of get them up in your head. And we just wanted you to think differently about how to not only look through your eyes, but through the eyes of the people that you are building these technologies or building these solutions, building these new models for. So kind of the theme of last week was empathy. This week is about what's called business modeling. This is will be a very useful tool. It'll be one of your best friends. Not only is it great for entrepreneurs to use as a way of getting the stuff out of your head and then testing it, but it's also a wonderful tool that we use as investors, as venture capitalists, because all the things that you have to think about to create your business, we're going to probably think about to ask you questions about what you're doing. So it works on kind of both sides of the equation. The reason I show this particular video that we're going to listen to, some of you may have seen it before. It's quite a popular TED Talk and conversation for innovation, one of the more important people in that space, a gentleman named Simon Sinek. And when you hear this talk, you'll understand why. And while everyone else is still coming into the room, this is, I think, like a 10, 12-minute video. When this is done, we'll jump right into the canvas.
How do you explain when things don't go as we assume? Or better, how do you explain when others are able to achieve things that seem to defy all of the assumptions? For example, why is Apple so innovative? Year after year after year after year, they're more innovative than all their competition. And yet they're just a computer company. They're just like everyone else. They have the same access to the same talent, the same agencies, the same consultants, the same media. Then why is it that they seem to have something different? Why is it that Martin Luther King led the civil rights movement? He wasn't the only man who suffered in a pre-civil rights America, and he certainly wasn't the only great orator of the day. Why him? And why is it that the Wright brothers were able to figure out controlled powered manned flight when there were certainly other teams who were better qualified, better funded, and they didn't achieve powered manned flight? The Wright brothers beat them to it. There's something else at play here. About 3.5 years ago, I made a discovery. And this discovery profoundly changed my view on how I thought the world worked, and it even profoundly changed the way in which I operate in it. As it turns out, there's a pattern. As it turns out, all the great and inspiring leaders and organizations in the world, whether it's Apple or Martin Luther King or the Wright brothers, they all think, act, and communicate the exact same way. And it's the complete opposite to everyone else. All I did was codify it. And it's probably the world's simplest idea. I call it the golden circle. Why, how, what? This little idea explains why some organizations and some leaders are able to inspire where others aren't. Let me define the terms really quickly. Every single person, every single organization on the planet knows what they do, 100%. Some know how they do it, whether you call it your differentiating value proposition or your proprietary process or your USP. But very, very few people or organizations know why they do what they do. And by why, I don't mean to make a profit. That's a result. It's always a result. By why, I mean what's your purpose? What's your cause? What's your belief? Why does your organization exist? Why do you get out of bed in the morning? And why should anyone care? Well, as a result, the way we think, the way we act, the way we communicate is from the outside in. It's obvious. We go from the clearest thing to the fuzziest thing. But the inspired leaders and the inspired organizations, regardless of their size, regardless of their industry, all think, act, and communicate from the inside out. Let me give you an example. I use Apple because they're easy to understand and everybody gets it. If Apple were like everyone else, a marketing message from them might sound like this. We make great computers. They're beautifully designed, simple to use, and user-friendly. Want to buy one? Meh. And that's how most of us communicate. That's how most marketing is done, that's how most sales is done, and that's how most of us communicate interpersonally. We say what we do, we say how we're different or how we're better, and we expect some sort of behavior, a purchase, a vote, something like that. Here's our new law firm. We have the best lawyers with the biggest clients. We have, we always perform for our clients, do business with us. Here's our new car. It gets great gas mileage. It has, leather seats. Buy our car. But it's uninspiring. Here's how Apple actually communicates. Everything we do, we believe in challenging the status quo. We believe in thinking differently. The way we challenge the status quo is by making our products beautifully designed, simple to use, and user-friendly. We just happen to make great computers. Want to buy one? Totally different, right? You're ready to buy a computer from me. All I did was reverse the order of the information. What it proves to us is that people don't buy what you do, people buy why you do it. People don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. This explains why every single person in this room is perfectly comfortable buying a computer from Apple. But we're also perfectly comfortable buying an MP3 player from Apple, or a phone from Apple, or a DVR from Apple. But as I said before, Apple's just a computer company. There's nothing that distinguishes them structurally from any of their competitors. Their competitors are all equally qualified to make all of these products. In fact, they tried. A few years ago, Gateway came out with flat-screen TVs. They're eminently qualified to make flat-screen TVs. They've been making flat-screen monitors for years. Nobody bought one. And Dell came out with MP3 players and PDAs. And they make great quality products, and they can make perfectly well-designed products, and nobody bought one. In fact, talking about it now, we can't even imagine buying an MP3 player from Dell. Why would you buy an MP3 player from a computer company? But we do it every day. People don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. The goal is not to do business with everybody who needs what you have. The goal is to do business with people who believe what you believe. Here's the best part. None of what I'm telling you is my opinion. It's all grounded in the tenets of biology, not psychology, biology. If you look at a cross-section of the human brain, looking from the top down, what you see is the human brain is actually broken into three major components that correlate perfectly with the golden circle. Our newest brain, our Homo sapien brain, our neocortex, corresponds with the what level. The neocortex is responsible for all of our rational and analytical thought and language. The middle two sections make up our limbic brains, and our limbic brains are responsible for all of our feelings, like trust and loyalty. It's also responsible for all human behavior, all decision-making, and it has no capacity for language. In other words, when we communicate from the outside in, yes, people can understand vast amounts of complicated information like features and benefits and facts and figures. It just doesn't drive behavior. When we communicate from the inside out, we're talking directly to the part of the brain that controls behavior, and then we allow people to rationalize it with the tangible things we say and do. This is where gut decisions come from. Sometimes you can give somebody all the facts and the figures, and you say, I know what all the facts and details say, but it just doesn't feel right. Why would we use that verb? It doesn't feel right. Because the part of the brain that controls decision-making doesn't control language. And the best we can muster up is, I don't know, it just doesn't feel right. Or sometimes you say you're leading with your heart, or you're leading with your soul. Well, I hate to break it to you, those aren't other body parts controlling your behavior. It's all happening here in your limbic brain, the part of the brain that controls decision-making and not language. But if you don't know why you do what you do, and people respond to why you do what you do, then how will anybody How will you ever get people to vote for you or buy something from you, or more importantly, be loyal and want to be a part of what it is that you do? Again, the goal is not just to sell people who need what you have. The goal is to sell to people who believe what you believe. The goal is not just to hire people who need a job. It's to hire people who believe what you believe. I always say that, there's if you hire people just because they can do a job, they'll work for your money. But if you hire people who believe what you believe, they work for you with blood and sweat and tears. And nowhere else is there a better example of this than with the Wright brothers. Most people don't know about Samuel Pierpont Langley. And back in the early 20th century, the pursuit of powered man flight was like the dot-com of the day. Everybody was trying it. And Samuel Pierpont Langley had what we assume to be the recipe for success. I mean, even now, you ask people, why did your product or why did your company fail? And people always give you the same permutation of the same three things. Undercapitalized, the wrong people, bad market conditions. It's always the same three things. So let's explore that. Samuel Pierpont Langley was given $50,000 by the War Department to figure out this flying machine. Money was no problem. He held a seat at Harvard and worked at the Smithsonian and was extremely well connected. He knew all the big minds of the day. He hired the best minds money could find, and the market conditions were fantastic. The New York Times followed him around everywhere, and everyone was rooting for Langley. And how come we've never heard of Samuel Pierpont Langley? A few hundred miles away in Dayton, Ohio, Orville and Wilbur Wright. They had none of what we consider to be the recipe for success. They had no money. They paid for their dream with the proceeds from their bicycle shop. Not a single person on the Wright brothers team had a college education, not even Orville or Wilbur. And the New York Times followed them around nowhere. The difference was Orville and Wilbur were driven by a cause, by a purpose, by a belief. They believed that if they could figure out this flying machine, it'll change the course of the world. Samuel Pierpont Langley was different. He wanted to be rich, and he wanted to be famous. He was in pursuit of the result. He was in pursuit of the riches. And lo and behold, look what happened. The people who believed in the Wright brothers' dream worked with them with blood and sweat and tears. The others just worked for the paycheck. And they tell stories of how every time the Wright brothers went out, they would have to take 5 sets of parts because that's how many times they would crash before they came in for supper. And eventually, on December 17th, 1903, the Wright brothers took flight. And no one was there to even experience it. We found out about it a few days later. And further proof that Langley was motivated by the wrong thing, the day the Wright brothers took flight, he quit. He could have said, that's an amazing discovery, guys, and I will improve upon your technology. But he didn't. He wasn't first, he didn't get rich, he didn't get famous, so he quit. People don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. And if you talk about what you believe, you will attract those who believe what you believe. Well, why is it important to attract those who believe what you believe? Something called the law of diffusion of innovation. And if you don't know the law, you definitely know the terminology. The first 2.5% of our population are our innovators. The next 13.5% of our population are our early adopters. The next 34% are your early majority, your late majority, and your laggards. The only reason these people buy touch-tone phones is because you can't buy rotary phones anymore. We all sit at various places at various times on the scale, but what the law of diffusion of innovation tells us is that if you want mass market success or mass market acceptance of an idea, you cannot have it until you achieve this tipping point between 15 and 18% market penetration, and then the system tips. And I love asking businesses, what's your conversion on new business? And they love to say, oh, it's about 10%, proudly. Well, you can trip over 10% of the customers. We all have about 10% who just get it. That's how we describe them, right? That's like that gut feeling, oh, they just get it. The problem is how do you find the ones that just get it before you're doing business with them versus the ones who don't get it. So it's this here, this little gap that you have to close, as Jeffrey Moore calls it, crossing the chasm. Because you see, the early majority will not try something until someone else has tried it first. And these guys, the innovators and the early adopters, they're comfortable making those gut decisions. They're more comfortable making those intuitive decisions that are driven by what they believe about the world. and not just what product is available. These are the people who stood online for 6 hours to buy an iPhone when they first came out, when you could have just walked into the store the next week and bought one off the shelf. These are the people who spent $40,000 on flat screen TVs when they first came out, even though the technology was substandard. And by the way, they didn't do it because the technology was so great. They did it for themselves. It's because they wanted to be first. People don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. And what you do simply proves what you believe. In fact, people will do the things that prove what they believe. The reason that person bought the iPhone in the first 6 hours, or stood in line for 6 hours, was because what they believed about the world and how they wanted everybody to see them. They were first. People don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. So let me give you a famous example, a famous failure and a famous success of the law of diffusion of innovation. First, the famous failure. It's a commercial example. As we said before a second ago, the recipe for success is money and the right people and the right marketing conditions, right? You should have success then. Look at TiVo. From the time TiVo came out, about 8 or 9 years ago, to this current day, they are the single highest quality product on the market. Hands down, there is no dispute. They are extremely well funded. Market conditions were fantastic. I mean, we use TiVo as a verb. I TiVo stuff on my piece of junk Time Warner DVR all the time. But TiVo's a commercial failure. They've never made money. And when they went IPO, their stock was at about $30 or $40 and then plummeted, and it's never traded above 10. In fact, I don't think it's even traded above 6, except for a couple of little spikes. Because you see, when TiVo launched their product, they told us all what they had. They said, we have a product that pauses live TV, skips commercials, rewinds live TV, and memorizes your viewing habits without you even asking. And the cynical majority said, we don't believe you, we don't need it, we don't like it, you're scaring us. What if they had said, if you're the kind of person who likes to have total control over every aspect of your life, boy, do we have a product for you. It pauses live TV, skips commercials, memorizes your viewing habits, etc., etc. People don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it, and what you do simply serves as the proof of what you believe. Now let me give you a successful example of the law of diffusion of innovation. In the summer of 1963, 250,000 people showed up on the Mall in Washington to hear Dr. King speak. They sent out no invitations, and there was no website to check the date. How do you do that? Well, Dr. King wasn't the only man in America who was a great orator. He wasn't the only man in America who suffered in a pre-civil rights America. In fact, some of his ideas were bad, but he had a gift. He didn't go around telling people what needed to change in America. He went around and told people what he believed. I believe, I believe, I believe, he told people. And people who believed what he believed took his cause and they made it their own, and they told people. And some of those people created structures to get the word out to even more people. And lo and behold, 250,000 people showed up on the right day, on the right time, to hear him speak. How many of them showed up for him? 0. They showed up for themselves. It's what they believed about America that got them to travel on a bus for 8 hours to stand in the sun in Washington in the middle of August. It's what they believed, and it wasn't about black versus white. 25% of the audience was white. Dr. King believed that there are 2 types of laws in this world, those that are made by a higher authority and those that are made by man. And not until all the laws that are made by man are consistent with the laws that are made by the higher authority will we live in a just world. It just so happens that the civil rights movement was the perfect thing to help him bring his cause to life. We followed him not for him, but for ourselves. And by the way, he gave the I have a dream speech, not the I have a plan speech. Listen to politicians now with their comprehensive 12-point plans. They're not inspiring anybody. Because there are leaders and there are those who lead. Leaders hold a position of power or authority, but those who lead inspire us. Whether they're individuals or organizations, we follow those who lead, not because we have to, but because we want to. We follow those who lead, not for them, but for ourselves. And it's those who start with why that have the ability to inspire those around them or find others who inspire them. Thank you very much.
So what'd you think of the, first of all, how many of you had seen that video before? Excellent. So appreciate you sitting through it again. For those of you who hadn't, the reason I wanted, and I think it's such an important document, let me just kind of get this to full screen. Let's see. If we do that. The reason that we wanted to do to show that to you is it's a great bridge from last week to this week. Because remember, he kept using the word belief, belief, belief. It's the exact same thing. Innovation is a religion. When you go to start a company, you have to just believe in it because you're creating the future. Very often, the products and services you're designing or that you may be interested in introducing to the world are things that are going to require people to change their behavior and see the world in an entirely new way. You have to be a phenomenal storyteller. You have to be able to excite people and be able to help them see your new reality. And in order to do that, you need to follow what Simon was talking about. Not getting in front, and I can tell you, because of the number of pitches we hear entrepreneurs do, they come in and pitch us and they start by just vomiting on us exactly what they're doing and how they're going to do it. And as he said, no one gets excited over that. People get excited about why you're doing it and about why this is so empowering and how this is going to change the world. Because one of the weeks we're going to talk about kind of the presentation. And last week we talked about, as much as we love to think that human beings are these intellectual, rational things, we are emotional, we are sentient beings. And why it's important, and we'll talk about this during the finance week, that when you're presenting to us, there's kind of 3 intellectual questions you have to answer, which is why you, why now, who cares? But more importantly, there's 3 emotional conditions you have to satisfy. You got to get me to care about you, you got to get me to remember you, and you've got to get me to act. And those things, when they come together, are really what's important. And in every case where we've seen entrepreneurs that we funded, they've all been phenomenal storytellers. They talk about a future that doesn't yet exist. They not only help us see that future, but they help us understand exactly how we play a role in that future. What it's going to feel like to use their technology or to have solved that problem. And this tool that we're going to show you today is merely the first step in terms of getting everything out of your head onto paper so that you can begin this journey. Let's see if we kind of advance the slides this way. There we go. Now, historically, people wrote business plans. That was the way the business schools taught people how to get the thoughts out of their head. What we realized is that no business plan will ever survive first contact with the customer, with the market. That almost every great technology company has ended up becoming either famous or creating the greatest economic and social impact for a product that they didn't originally start out moving. Qualcomm did not start out with CDMA chips. They started off with a company called Omnitrax. But Instagram was not initially a photo sharing site, and Uber was not initially a traditional ride sharing site. These are things that they pivoted into from doing. The business model is a flexible and adaptable system, but it's a way of articulating the flow and dependencies of all the aspects of your business, but in a way that you can go back and change, you can reconsider, you can evolve. So it's meant to be as a living, breathing, organic document. Now, why is this important? Is because first of all, we got to get all the thoughts out of our head. We got to get our to organize them down on paper, because that leaves room for new thoughts to come in, and then it also leaves room for us to be able to ask questions. But it's also a way to kind of testing all of these things. Now, instead of a business plan, we use a canvas. Now, just like an artist's canvas, this is a blank document. It's a place for you to create and draw, and then go back and redraw. So this is not a precious thing. Don't treat it as something you're going to frame on a wall. So why business modeling versus business planning? Business plans are static documents. Probably the only thing they're good for after they're written is perhaps as a doorstop. Now, while I will give you that there are wonderful ways of, as a discipline, of organizing your thoughts and getting them out there in a way to test them, that this business canvas and the business model is a much better way to do that. Again, because it's less precious and it allows for organic movement in what you're kind of doing. If you're trying to build a company or a business opportunity and you have no sales, no customers, you may not even have a product yet or even a prototype, you need to be able to put these things as ways of testing and learning from what you're doing. Now, what's interesting is when people hand us presentations or when they present to us, one of the slides, of course, that we all look at are the financial projections. The one thing I can tell you about all financial projections in an entrepreneurial presentation is they're always wrong, but that's fine. Because those are less important than usually the page that comes right after it, which is your assumptions. How did you come to putting those numbers and those ideas into your spreadsheet? That's what we really like to get into and talk with you. Because some people create their spreadsheets by literally putting one number in the upper left cell of their Excel spreadsheet and then having mathematical formulas that populate every other cell. Now, if you can't explain to me how you derived at each cell, what was the thinking behind it, chances are we're going to have a pretty difficult time coming to an agreement of how to support you. On the other hand, if you have a good understanding about the assumptions you use to make that, then that's going to tell me not only whether the opportunity is good, it's all going to give me insights into how you think. Because it's really different when you say, we really think that we can start off by getting a small percentage of the market because we know these people or we know this group, and we really think that we can grow organically over this period of time, as opposed to, we're going to start by getting 10% of the market. How did you come up with that? Now we just think we can get 10% of the market. That's not very convincing. So we have to know what your assumptions are and how you came to them. Another way we will test your thinking is we get people presenting to us and they say, hey, we have this wonderful cancer diagnostic and we're going to be using it to go after breast cancer and prostate cancer. One of the questions I'm going to probably ask you is, what are two other forms of cancer you looked at and why did you not decide to go after those? And if you don't have a good answer for that, it's telling me that you really didn't think this through all the way. So it's not only important to know why you're doing what you're doing, but why you're not doing other things. Again, those are the good thought processes, and this will help you do it. And as I said, you're able to remodel this as you pivot. Now, how many of you have heard that term pivot? It's overused a little bit in the entrepreneurial realm, but again, it's where you change something significant about your business model, your approach, your team, something about what you're doing. And usually that comes when new information comes to you that either invalidates what you thought you were going to be able to do, or new opportunities present themselves that are even greater than what you originally started off doing. So changing your mind is not bad. Now, you should each have a business model canvas in front of you. If you don't, raise your hand, we can get one to you. Oh, there's quite a few people. So we will get one to you. These are also downloadable. This is an open source tool developed by Alex Osterwalder and Yves Penier. And it's really nice because, as I said, it's been open source, and of course, this approach has been popularized even further by the works of people like Eric Ries and Steve Blank, who have used it as part of an even larger process of customer discovery and agile development. But this is the first step. When they talk about building a business, the first step is this. Now, And so what the canvas is, it's a series of boxes. These boxes represent various critical elements of the business opportunity that you're going to look at. Now, when we as investors look at entrepreneurs, you have to understand that we do not invest in technologies. We also don't invest in ideas. We invest in business opportunities, because those business opportunities are the things that manifest themselves in value in the market and then return the value back to us. And so we can be excited about you, we can be excited about the team, we can be excited about your technology, but ultimately part of it has to be the business opportunity. And when we assess what we're looking at, there's really 4 critical elements of what we're going to look at. The first one is, of course, your idea and its defensibility. Do you have the ability to actually do it? Is there someone else who might come in and displace you with your idea? And next week we'll talk about things like intellectual property, and that will be part of that defensibility. The second bucket we review is the people. Do we have confidence in you and that you can actually execute on what you say? But not only that, that you can attract the people around you that are going to help you grow and scale this thing, and that you can also attract customers, investors, and keep the team happy all at the same time. That's 2. The third bucket, of course, is the business model, which is there a way of translating this idea that you have into something that can be captured by the market? So it's one thing to create value, but even more important for us as investors, it's important to capture the value. So it's not about just value creation, it's also about value capture. That's the third bucket. And the fourth bucket is timing. Is this the right time for this? How do we know? Are you truly riding this interesting wave that will grow into something bigger? Or might you be too early or too late? Now the first segment of the canvas that we look at is the customer segments, which are which customers and users are you serving, what jobs do they really want to get done. This is another way of saying is knowing your customer. Who actually is your customer? And do you really know who they are? Who is the one who's going to be using your product? And by the way, in every company, there usually is both a customer and a buyer. They're not always the same person. The customer is the one who derives utility from what you're doing. The buyer is the one who actually writes the check for it. If you're selling to a consumer, they're the same person, because usually the person who gets the utility out of it is the one who pays for it. But in a large company, they may be different people. You may be selling a technical solution to the engineering department. You may have to have it purchased by the chief financial officer or finance department. So when you tell your story, those are going to be different. The next bucket, and you have to know kind of what problems they want you to solve for them, going back to the last thing. It's not just what they want, but what problem are they trying to solve? So think about it that way. We dealt with this, for those of you who weren't here, we dealt with this a little bit last week in the design thinking. Again, it's not what do you want me to build for you, more importantly, what problem do you need solved? Now, with this particular one, the value proposition. Yes, I can build this solution for you. I can help you solve your problem. And let me tell you what the value proposition is, how much money you're going to save, or what we call the negative argument, which is what you're going to lose by not using our solution. Every day you aren't using our solution, it's costing us X. One of our entrepreneurs who actually came from UCSD, who I sit as an advisor to and we've done work with, is in the oil discovery space. They have a small sensor that sits on the ground. It's ruggedized and has the ability to take an image of what's underneath the ground down to a couple of miles. And the reason this is so interesting is because the way they presented this to their customer is every day you're not using our solution, you're losing $1 million of revenue. So you can present things in a way of, look at how much money you're going to save, or look at what how I'm going to be able to grow your revenue. But it's just as effective as every day you're not using us, this is how much money you're losing. And the reason that's important, carrying over from what we said last week, is biologically human beings are wired to minimize loss before they maximize gain. Which is another way of saying we hate losing even more than we love winning. And so if you can make people realize what they aren't getting from using, or what they are missing out by not using your technology, that's quite powerful. The channels. You can have a fantastic value proposition, you can know your customer segments and who they are, and the question is, how are you going to push that value to your customers? How does each customer segment want to be reached? How do they? Is this going to be an online business? Is this going to be something direct? Are you going to have shops in a mall? Are you going to have people going door to door? How do you actually reach your customers? You'll also hear about people talking about the go-to-market strategy of what you're doing. But ultimately, it's always the same thing. You have a fantastic idea and a way of creating value in the world. You have to somehow get that into the hands of the consumer or the customer for what you're doing. And what are the various interaction points? Sometimes it's direct, sometimes it's indirect. Customer relationships. What relationships do you have to establish with each of the segments? Are they personal? Are they automated? Do you acquire them? Are they retentive? And an example of what this highlights is during the dot-com days, the reason people were so excited about the internet and this whole B2B and B2C and B2G and all these C2C business models is through something called disintermediation. We thought that, gee, isn't it exciting? We have a product, we know where the customers are, why do we need all these people in the middle? Look at how much money we can save, or that we can pass on to the consumer, if we can just take these products and get them directly into the hands of the customer. And many of these companies, in fact, most of them, actually failed. The reason is that there were a set of relationships in place that were creating value that this disintermediation model wasn't accounting for. They're human beings. So for instance, there's wholesalers and distributors, but I may have had that relationship with you for 10 years, that I may have been selling you fish or widgets of some kind for years, and you and I have developed trust. That trust has a value, because you know 1 week if you didn't get everything you were supposed to, or there was something wrong with the product I delivered, you would pick up the phone and say, hey, we've got a problem. Will you take care of it? That's something very hard to do in an automated world, which is why one of Jeff Bezos's and Amazon's fetishes is customer service and customer experience. Making sure that you have absolutely the best customer experience. If you have a problem, we'll take care of it. It was also the thing to help eliminate a lot of the fear out of people purchasing on eBay. That if you bought something and it was either fraudulent or you didn't receive it, we'll help you take care of it. We will step in. We will guarantee the purchase price. Again, this is a way of establishing relationships, which is a longer way of saying it's establishing trust. And once we have trust between the parties, it eliminates, or it certainly speeds up the transaction. The revenue streams. So now we have a product, we know who our customers are, we have a value proposition, we have ways of now getting into it, we know who we have to work with in the relationship, we've got this kind of synergy going back and forth. But in exchange for something, we give value to you as the customer gives value back to us as the business. Those are the revenue streams. How are we going to make money? What are they willing to pay for? How have you validated that? Are you generating transactional or recurring revenues? Is this a one-time purchase, or is this something you can sell over and over again? And as we get to some of the business models in here, you will see some of the various ways we capture that value. So we've now got a lot of the kind of core elements of the business locked up. The next thing is now key resources. How are we going to do this? How are we going to build it? What resources underpin the business model? Which assets are essential? What are the things we need to actually build our companies? If we're manufacturing widgets and we're going to manufacture things ourselves, we're going to need space. We're going to need equipment. If we're outsourcing that, we're going to need very different things. Now, you can have resources you need, which are the things you need to do it, but then the activities are, what are you going to do with those resources? We're going to have to translate or transform these ideas or these raw products or these raw goods into finished product or services or models. And what do we have to do in order to get them into the market, and what is crucial? Now, in a perfect world, you could probably do all these things all on your own. There could be a very linear correlation between what you do and your customer. In reality, you're going to be doing it with partners. You have to ask yourself, do I build it? Do I buy it? Do I rent it? Do I lease it? What do I do? And some of our favorite models are ones that have this hybrid of things you do, where you may have some core intellectual property that you need to control. You may want to keep it tight, but you may have to partner other elements of your business, things that are either non-essential, non-critical, but can help you grow and scale what you're doing. Go back like there, but of course it's going to switch. But it's basically saying that all this is really good, but the only way a business is really going to make sense and we're going to be able to drive that revenue is if we're able to sell the product for more than it would cost us to build it. That's what it's saying. We just can't lose money. But what are our cost structures? We have to understand. And what's critical about that is one of the businesses that I had the pleasure of investing in years ago that a good friend had started, a company called Overstock.com. When it first started out, the way they kind of sold the overstock merchandise, they bought the distressed merchandise from various companies and sources, and then brought it into their warehouses to be then repackaged and resold. What they didn't think, what they thought was, gee, isn't this fantastic? We can buy something that originally was being sold for $1, and we can buy it for 20 cents. That's fantastic because we can buy it for 20 cents, sell it for 40 or 50 cents, and still make a ton of money. Isn't that a great business? And yes, it sounds really great. What they didn't count on, at least in the early days, was that every time you had to touch that merchandise, there was a cost. When the goods had to be shipped into the warehouse, when the goods, once they came in the warehouse, had to be put on the shelf, when they had to be put on the shelf and then inventoried, when then someone sent in an order and they had to be pulled out, then they had to be packaged and shipped. But then some of the people returned stuff and they came back, and then those had to be adequated and put back on the shelves. And all those things were small little costs. They call those friction costs. Those weren't all being properly accounted for. Now, they were still making quite a bit of money, but not as much money as they had thought or they had hoped. So when you do your cost structures, you're going to find you're going to have to think very detailed about them. And think about every time you have to touch something or there's a activity associated with those goods and services, there's a cost to it. Today, the way a lot of the products and services in overstock are done is the same way. If you have distressed merchandise, don't bother shipping it to my warehouse. Why go through the cost of shipping these things multiple times? Keep it in your warehouse. We'll help you with the logistics to ship it from your warehouse directly to the customer. And that way, number one, we can build a much larger catalog of merchandise to ship. But two, we don't have to touch the thing every time. So just little ways of thinking about your cost structures. This is what it looks like when it's kind of all put together, when the pieces begin coming together, and how fits, just like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle. Now, there's various ways you can download these canvases. There's electronic versions you can create yourself with sticky notes. There's iPad version, there's phone versions. There's various ways. But I strongly suggest that if you're an entrepreneur, one of the people in the class that has an idea or is thinking about starting a company, please go through this exercise. It'll be one of the most valuable uses of your time than you can imagine. And when you download some of these, there are some versions that are meant to be printed very, very large. So go to Kinko's, have them print, several of these things really big, put them up on the wall, use sticky Post-it notes to then populate that, because that way when you have sticky Post-it notes, you can kind of grab them and move them to different things. You can throw them away, you can put a new one on there, and that's one fantastic way to start. This is a version of the same business canvas that you have in front of you. Some of the canvases have some detailed writing in them. This is actually part of a larger book called Business Model Generation. You can buy the book too because it goes into detail behind the thinking on the canvas. But realize that, that this is about pulling together all the building blocks of your business, all the things that make up what your company is and can be. But also understand that all the building blocks you're going to vomit onto your canvas are at the end of the day nothing more than guesses. As we said last week, inside of a classroom or inside of a laboratory or inside of your office or your cubicle or wherever you're working on these things, no facts exist. All the facts exist in the real world, in the wild. All you're really going to do is have assumptions, hypotheses, observations, anecdotes, interpretation of facts, and truly some facts about what's going on. And you're going to put these all down there, and then what you're going to do is you're going to find ways of saying, okay, I guess what I'm hypothesizing is that I can actually buy the raw goods for X. I can then pay Y for labor and produce the product for Z. I then can sell it to the market for this number, and I can make a profit of this other number. Those, again, are all assumptions, they're guesses, the hypothesis, and then the question was, how am I going to test that? How do I know who my key customers are? How do I know, or customer segments? How do I know what the activities and resources are? Now, this is a kind of a simplified version of Apple's Canvas. This wasn't done by Apple. This was actually done by Alex and Eve that we're talking about, just to give a sense of this, of how Apple's Canvas might look for what they're doing. And you can see that you can start off really simple, or you can get really complicated. Now, the reason Alex and Eve designed the canvas in this particular way was they were trying to mimic, in some ways, the way the brain works, although we know the brain doesn't work exactly left and right brain this way. But it comes out of a similar proposition, what's called blue ocean strategy, which said that the greatest business opportunities are at the confluence of two things: great value creation and great efficiency. When you're able to create a business that's as efficient as can be and creates the most value can be, you have the best business. So that's the intersection. It's the same way left to right. Now, when you look at the canvas, the left side of the canvas is all about how you create efficiency in your business model, how you create the best company and best operating business you can. The right is how do you create the most value for your customer, the market, society, the environment, whatever it is you're trying to do. And the intersection of those two is a great business opportunity. Now, the reason we do this next section is this is all around patterns. Now, human beings are great at one of two things. We can either, we're great at finding patterns in things, or we can look at novelty. If every business and business model you want to create was completely novel, it'd be really, really difficult. You'd spend a lot of time kind of convincing the market of this. To be honest, most businesses that get presented to us and to the market are actually retreaded businesses of what's come before. There's nothing wrong with that. Think of it the way they pitch movies. You know, it's like Die Hard meets Interview with the Vampire. You know, people are constantly doing these interesting mashups. Business models are kind of the same way in terms of how people see this. And you're going to find out that the business and business models attached to many companies are quite familiar to you. Hagel and Singer talked about unbundling the corporation. This is their version, where you can have multiple businesses inside of one business, where you're able to do multiple things and drive multiple revenues in multiple ways, but they're all under the guise of one type of business. In this case, this is CRM, product innovation, infrastructure management, or you could have different economic imperatives, which means how you're trying to drive the bottom line. You're trying to change the world, you're trying to make people's lives better, and you're trying to make money. The examples of complex businesses are things like banking and telecommunications. Banking is very much a relationship business. They started by just being a business that held your money. Now they sell you everything. They sell you all these kind of services. So there's a number of these companies that are, have multiple service offerings and touch you in a way, and they try to act like by offering you a bucket of services or a bucket of products that they're able to create something valuable for you. The long tail, this is, I guess, in the scope of social evolution, this is a kind of a newer type of business model. With the introduction of the internet, we can now sell less of more. Basically what this says is that the world is incredibly bipolar. At the one end of the world, you have these huge marketplaces, the Amazons of the world, that literally sell everything. There's few things you can't buy, even eBay. I bought one of my cars on eBay. You know, who would have ever thought 30, 40 years ago that you would buy a car on an internet marketplace? So examples of less is more is Netflix, eBay, YouTube, Hulu, these things that have very, very small membership fees. And so you pay them because each one doesn't seem like it's all that much. And the company makes such enormous revenue because it's not your business, it's the aggregation of all the people, all the subscribers. I think it was Netflix just exceeded, they announced the other day that they exceeded revenue expectations, but by quite a bit, as I remember. It was almost like by 7 or 8%, or might have even been more than that, increase in customer revenue expectations. Even Lego and M&M have it now to where you can actually order Legos and M&Ms with your own personalization on them. That's a way, again, of selling less, lots of small things to lots of people. Before, companies just couldn't do that kind of customization for individuals. Multi-sided platforms. These are the market exchanges. These are the companies like eBay. They bring together fragmented or multiple parties across a very kind of distant chasm, and they find a way of bringing these people together, buyers, sellers, people looking for things and people wanting to sell things into a market. And value is generated only if one group is present with another group. So think of it like a seesaw. It doesn't work if it's weighted all one way versus the other way. The true value of the marketplace is in having people on both sides. So eBay is the easiest one to think about because the more people who list products on eBay, then you have the customers who are willing to buy. And what's interesting about things like eBay, before that happened, we had these flyers that got sent around to individual homes called the Penny Saver. I don't know if they still do those or not, but they used to put them in your mailbox. And they were just kind of listings of local, like classified ads, things that people were trying to sell. And you could also, it's like going to yard sales. And you could have these, you could often find what were called Rembrandts in the attic. You know, these special deals that, God, you just found something. People don't realize what they've got and how much value it truly has. I just bought something worth, you know, several $100s. I bought it for $10, and the person didn't even know that. Today, that's so much harder to do because these marketplaces are so large. There's so much transparency in them that the value comes pretty close to what the market is valuing these things for. Free. We're all familiar with these ones. Internally, they call these the cocaine model. They give you a little bit of something for free, they get you hooked, and they've kind of got you. Or it's a freemium model where they give you a little bit of the service, and you can use the free version of the service, or you can upgrade. These are everything from, hey, we'll be happy to take all the ads off your service in exchange for a small freemium fee, to the one that I paid for, like on Hulu, which is you can pay a couple of dollars more and you won't have to look at any of the commercials. So then it just becomes a mathematical calculation in terms of what is your time worth and what is your attention worth. But so many of these things that are also free are also about subsidized models. These are where you get a service basically for free and they make money in other ways. Now this is particularly interesting because for those of you who may have watched any of the CNN or the hearings last week where Mark Zuckerberg presented to a number of lawmakers, it was clear that a lot of these lawmakers had no idea how Facebook worked. Because one of them even asked him, they said, how can you possibly have a business and let people use it for free? And he very much kept his attitude in check, and he basically said, we sell ads. And they said, you can make money, basically you can make money selling ads, and he goes, yeah, you can. It's quite a nice little business. But again, this is where the value you're receiving is actually being subsidized by somebody else. And there's a reason for it. They want your data, they want to know something about you. There's some value being exchanged. You may not see the value, but it is being exchanged. Open business model. This is one that's great if you can explore. Not enough people kind of look at about this. It's also known as open innovation. There's two ways to do this. Procter & Gamble began looking at this where they said, wow, we probably don't need to innovate ourselves. We could probably go to the market and crowdsource the innovation for the market. So as an example, Pringles, potato chips, were an example of open sourced innovation where they figured out how to create perfectly formed potato chips that all stacked on one another. You get far more in there, and they weren't all crushed when you got them. But it's also a way of basically solving a problem. Now, it also works in reverse too. There were companies that actually had intellectual property portfolios or things that were of value, and they didn't know what to do with them. So they said, we'll put them out in the market. If people know what to do with them, we'll share the value of what's being created. And of course, the most famous example of this is things like the App Store, where you can be a developer, you can create something of value, post it on the App Store, and you can share the value of what you're getting from the customers who buy it with the Apple themselves. And there's lots of ways of doing it. If you're a game developer, you can do it on Steam. You can. There's a lot of these development platforms where there's shared. So that's an open business model. So you can see that there's lots of different types of existing business models that you may be able to appropriate for your own business. You may have a different idea in place, but start by looking at these. Now, by the way, these aren't the only ones that are available. There's lots of other business models. The second step of it is once you actually have identified what you're doing and what model you may want to wrap this around, now you can begin designing. Now, one of the useful tools in designing a solution is what's called the empathy map. This is kind of a cool tool. This is just imagining that if you went to a cocktail party that was being held kind of in your honor for your product, the launch of your product, and everyone in the room had used or knew about your product, what would they be doing with you? What would they be saying about you? What would they be feeling? What would they be gossiping? What would they be pleased about? What would they not like about your product? But these empathy maps are quite a good way of thinking about how people perceive your product and the value that your product delivers. These are just some examples, and we will give you copies of this. But these empathy maps are a great way of thinking about how people will perceive and like or dislike your product. We did the ideation last week, but there's a lot of other ways when you're coming up with your ideas. The design thinking model we did is just one way, but ideating in the first place, there's all these things. You can look all of these things up. Brain writing and brain walking. Worst idea, just ways of getting your kind of head woken up. Lateral thinking exercises. Atlassian, I have the Atlassian's FedEx Days. That was, Atlassian's the software company out of Australia. And one of the things they started doing is they set aside one day a month within their company for the people in the company to work on projects that had absolutely nothing to do with their day job. Work on something completely different. The only thing is we want you to come in the next day and talk about what you worked on. So that's why they called them FedEx Days, because you delivered overnight on your idea. And what was interesting is some of the ideas that came out of that actually turned out were quite useful for the company. In fact, today, many companies use this process, where they either take a certain number of days per month and they let people work on solutions, or they crowdsource new ideas for the company. In fact, Pixar took it to the step where they allow people within the company to use the tools of the company. So maybe there's film editing software that they let people use. But then the next day you have to come in and talk about how you used it, because some of the insights that come off of that are important. Another example that came from the Google example was Gmail. How many of you use Gmail? That was never a product that was thought up by Google. That was not on the roadmap. It wasn't something they were originally doing. It just came up from someone who was using that 20% time to work on a project, and they came and they suggested that, and it became now part of the product roadmap. So there's amazing things you can do when you aren't thinking about the thing that you're supposed to do. And then of course, storyboarding and scenario planning. We do a lot of that for our presentations. When we work with our entrepreneurs, we actually write out storyboards, because not only do we want to know what information we have to cover, but how do we actually want to present that information, which is then the storytelling. We did a workshop. Unfortunately, you guys are probably about a month late for the workshop we just did at the Ignite conference, but we did a storytelling workshop. And one of our colleagues who used to work at Pixar helped us develop this, as well as another colleague of ours who's a well-known author. Because what we realized, the most important skill you need as an entrepreneur is not necessarily how to do business model canvases, although that is important. The most important skill you're going to need to be a great entrepreneur is to be a great storyteller, to get people excited again about that future you want to create, and then get us to want to listen and know more about what you're doing. Now, once you have all these things, now we can talk about the strategy. So it's great to create a business model canvas. It's great to have all these pieces aligned and put together for what you want to do. But understand that if you're trying to build a plane, it doesn't exist in a vacuum. A plane, when you put it up in the air, is still subject to the forces of nature: lift, thrust, drag, all these things that are conspiring against your company or your opportunity to take it down. These are examples of what you have to look at, which is your business model isn't the end of the story once you've thought about this, that there's going to be a number of external forces that are pushing on your business, whether they be macroeconomic trends, which includes things like interest rates, availability of capital in the market, how people just feel about it. Are you selling a luxury item, or are you selling something that's more of a commodity necessity? What other competitive products are in the market that are trying to take you down? And again, when we often talk to entrepreneurs about their competition, they think very, very narrowly about what competition means. They think about it as who's building exactly the same product that we're building? Nobody. We're the only ones building it. But that's not necessarily what competition means. If people have a problem and they're currently solving their problem in a certain way, how are they actually solving that? That's one of your competitors. If there's new products coming to the market that are going to help people solve their problem, but in a different way, that's also a competitor. But it's also who competes for the resources you need to build your company. Maybe talent, coders, engineers, salespeople, marketing people with certain skill sets. It may be competition for attention, ad space. So think about what competition actually means in this sense. And of course, with that is also it says down there, the market forces, the switching costs. If people are solving their problem in a certain way now, and you want them to use your way, whether you know it or not, there's an actual cost to them switching. And the only way they're going to switch the cost is if they see yours as a superior result, both intellectually and emotionally, if they feel better about it. So it has to be attractive in several different ways. For those students who've taken any kind of business classes, you will be familiar with what they call Swot Analyses. This is just a tool that's kind of taught in every kind of business course. It stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. In every business, you've got, again, all these forces against you. This is just a different way of looking at that. Strengths are what are those things that you do and you do better than anyone else, the things you boast about and you brag about, the things that you want everyone to see. The weaknesses are the things that you're aware of that you need to improve or you need to manage, mitigate in some ways for what you're doing. Opportunities are where you can possibly go. And the threats are what are the things you're going to encounter that will keep you from going there. And of course, we talked about blue ocean strategy. The blue ocean strategy, as we said, is where how as you drive down costs and you increase value, the place in the middle is where your innovation truly exists. So once you get all that done, now the question is, how do you pull it all together? What is the process? Now the reason these tools are important is because the very last class you're going to come up with, the last day, we're going to ask those of you who have ideas, you can either work in teams or individually to present your business cases. You can present them as showing us just your business model canvas, or you can present them as a typical presentation, and we're happy to give you templates for that as well. But we still want you to have gone through the business canvas because chances are we are going to ask you questions about that. Now, the nice thing about the presentations when we do them, we're not going to have time because of the size of the class for everyone to present, or we may not have time for everyone to present. So we'll take them on a first come, first served basis. But the other thing is that I'm not going to be the only one asking the questions, although we're going to have people we're going to invite from the community and from UCSD to help give some constructive feedback on your ideas. We're also going to, more importantly, let the audience, you, ask a lot of the questions. One of the best ways to learn these tools is by actually using them, and then from you asking the questions will help you learn even more about these tools. So the 5 phases of pulling this all together. The first one is mobilize. Just means getting everything together, getting it in proximity, getting it close together, begin collecting all the information together, getting everything down onto your canvas, getting as much as you can. Try to be as complete as possible. The second one is stand back away from the canvas and try to understand what you've just put up there. Not necessarily understand each box, although you need to do that, but understand how all the boxes relate to one another. What you're going to find is that in most business cases, particularly in business models, one box informs the other box. Usually most business models begin in one box and everything drives around it. Maybe that kind of your key value proposition is you've got some intellectual property, some idea that has a patent around it that no one else can do. It may be that you have a set of relationships in the market. You've just been known and people know you. People have a lot of trust in you in the market. And it's such a niche market that people will buy from you over other people just because they've done business with you before. Other times it may be that you are just able to make something at a much more preferable price point than what other people would do. Higher quality, lower price. Again, you'll determine what that value proposition is. And once you understand what you have, then you can begin to design. Figure the appropriate business model, a long tail, an open innovation, one of these models that can do, or your own. You may come up with an entirely new business model. One of the favorite business models that people have is, I think it was mentioned on one of the slides, the Gillette model, which is kind of a, they give you the razor for free, but then they charge you a fortune for the razor blade replacements. We like these razor blades, which is another way of saying we can often give you something, but the consumables that you need to replace every month or every 3 months are the things that really create the value and the revenue for the company long term. That's when you'll design things. Then once you can do it, then you can implement and manage. Now again, because these are dynamic processes, what you're going to find is when you are doing these canvases that they're going to constantly be changed. You're going to constantly revisit them and change things, take stickers off. So even after you've created your business model and maybe take pictures of it, leave it up in your office. Don't take it down. Don't assume that just because you think you've gone through the process that it's all done, because invariably it will change. And it may change not a week from now or 2 weeks from now or maybe even a month from now. It may change a year from now. So just be aware of that. And this is the last slide. This just shows a more kind of comprehensive, the book, the business model generation book, you can download or you can purchase. I don't know if they have this at the bookstore, but again, it's a great way of kind of getting things down there. And this is just an example of one that is completed. So now I will take questions, if anyone has any questions. No questions at all. Is that because things were just explained so clearly that you get it and you're kind of bored? Or is it because you're saying, God, this is over my head, or wasn't very clear?
I have a question. You were talking about overstock.com.
Yes.
I know that it's gone.
Yeah.
But I'm very curious of how they still make money, because I noticed when I bought stuff from them and other similar companies, and when something comes or breaks, whatever, they say, well, just keep it, we'll send a new one. And I said, there's no way these people can make money that way.
But they do, and they still make money. The margins, what they're able to buy it for and what they're able to sell it for, but also superior logistics. It's kind of also like with Amazon. The reason Amazon is such an amazing company is not only do they give a superior customer experience, which is the same thing that Overstock is going for too, is to make customers just so loyal that when you buy something, the first place you check is on their website if you need something. And by the way, the kinds of things that people buy on Overstock are not the kinds of things that they buy on Amazon. They don't buy large pieces of furniture or beds on Amazon, although some people I'm sure do. But they make the customer experience so smooth, so painless, so trusting and trustworthy. The second thing is then back it up with superior logistics, where you order something and the next day it shows up at your house. And you're going, how the heck did they do that? And that's exactly what they want you to be saying. How the heck did they do that? And when you call with a complaint or you want to do something, someone gets back to you immediately and says, no worry, we've taken care of it. You can keep it, we'll send you a replacement. Or they're saying, no problem, there's a prepaid label in the package. Just slap it on, send it in the mail. If you want someone to pick it up, we can arrange for someone to pick it up. That is customer service, because they know that when you're a lifelong customer, it's not about the one transaction, it's about the lifelong of transactions that are going to happen. So that's how Overstock does it. You had a question too.
Yeah, my question was about, you mentioned that the business doesn't exist in a vacuum. You know, you have to think about external forces and things. When somebody's pitching to you, the person pitching will never know all of those forces. So do you kind of, are you more supportive of them if they're just more conservative in their projections? Or how do you account for all of those unknowns?
So first of all, we don't expect the entrepreneur pitching us to know everything, but they certainly better know more than we do. And the reason is because if someone is an expert, or they've developed an expertise in the company, hopefully they're surrounding themselves with good advisors, mentors. In fact, two of the most important groups that you can put around your opportunity are scientific advisors, people who know the science and can validate it for you, and the other one are business advisory boards. So technical advisory boards and business advisory boards. And when you do, what I would advise you to do is don't think of just who the best people are on campus. But if you truly have something that you really believe in and you think it's really important and disruptive, think of who are the best people in the world to get behind you. And what's great is because as students, as people associated with universities, if you reach out to people, be bold. You'll find that a lot of people will take your phone calls. People will, or at least answer your emails. And if you truly have something exciting, they'll see how they can be helpful to you. If you don't have something exciting, they'll tell you probably why they don't think it's exciting. So that's the one advantage that you have. But this is not, that entrepreneurship is not a solo sport, it's a team sport. And the other thing is that you never go hunting alone. build out really strong networks of people around you, so that when you do present, and when we see you present your pitch, and we see the people on your business advisory board, and these names are credible, or people who have helped influence or shape an industry, that goes a long way. Now, the other thing that goes to that is when we are now questioning you, and let's say you do a pitch, and there's something that you may not know, we have to, in our mind, categorize what that is. Is that saying, this is something they absolutely should have known, and that they don't know? That's what we call a red flag. But if it's something that is less important, and we ask you a question, there's nothing wrong with you saying, that's a really good question, I don't know that, but I'd like to get back to you. And by the way, we're going to talk about this again during the Finance Week. When we sometimes ask you questions when you've pitched to us, sometimes it truly is that we're intrigued or we want to know the answer. Sometimes we're just testing you. Not so much playing with you, but we're testing you. In fact, sometimes we'll be sitting with an entrepreneur and he'll reference a particular study that demonstrates some data in support of what they're doing. I'm going, wow, that's a really interesting study. I'd really like to look at that. Could you send that to me? What I'm really doing is testing to see how long it is before you send that to me. Because great entrepreneurs, that will be in my inbox by the time that I close, the meeting and I walk back to my desk, that will already be in my inbox. If it takes you 2 weeks to send it to me, that tells me something else about you. And so we find that great entrepreneurs are relentless, they're great at follow-up. And if you don't know something, don't be afraid to say you don't know it. Because BSing your way is far worse. Because once you lose that credibility, you just never, ever gain it back. On campus at the business school, there's a class called the Rady Venture Fund. It's an actual venture fund that some alumni and donors have endowed so that the students can learn the process of investing. So we get companies that actually come in and pitch, and the students then get to ask questions and do the diligence on them. And during one of the presentations, the guy was commenting on how the entrepreneur was saying, and I built all these companies worth this amount, and I've created this kind of value. And what they didn't know is that we were sitting there Googling them at the time and going, no, they didn't. Everything, several things they saying were just not true. So when you kind of create that disconnect, that's what we call a fatal flaw, which is different than a red flag. A fatal flaw is once it happens, we just consider you dead. A red flag are just things that we need to be aware of, and then there's yellow flags, which are things that are like, let's figure that out. But the most important thing is you've got to be authentic and you've got to be credible. That's what's really, really critical. It's part of the whole storytelling. It's kind of what we said yesterday, last week, is be you. You just got to be you, and you've got to be credible. And if you're not credible, then it's going to be a downhill. Because you have to also assume that as investors, we've got choices of where to put our capital. That we're seeing lots of deals. And the one thing you will find, I'll give you an insight. Most investors, particularly most professional investors, have attention deficit disorder. We're all ADD. It's one of the reasons we like the job, because we get to look at lots of very cool things. But the thing is that once we finish looking at one deal, there's another one that catches our eye about it. And so you really got to capture our imagination, you got to capture our heart, and then you got to get us to do something, which is why kind of the follow-up and the diligence is important. You had a question?
Yeah, I have a question. So obviously more and more services and platforms are online, with everything kind of starting with advertising, with revenue generation and monetizing it, then moving kind of more towards now data collection and recurring revenue streams. What are kind of the next ways you're seeing revenue generation with these online platforms and monetization? Because I think what's kind of like the next steps?
It's a very good question. So what are the kind of next revenue generation or value capture mechanisms? I don't know that I've seen anything. I've seen some interesting technologies that are going to capture it in different ways, but not really anything novel other than things like the way the blockchain is going to allow us to now add trust onto a lot of these things through things like smart contracts. that we're going to decrease the cost of the transactions.
How do you, like, you build a blockchain platform other than like doing cryptocurrency or things like that? How do you?
Well, beyond the crypto, so the cryptocurrency isn't it? The real opportunity is in smart contracts,
Right.
but it's just like what you're doing now. You can actually charge for the services of creating the smart contracts. The other area of blockchain is identity and identity management, getting people registered onto centralized identity platforms where they own their identity as opposed to some other centralized infrastructure owning it. And then they get to make the choices. And the way that's monetized, let's say for yourself, is like there's a company here in San Diego called LunaCoin that's allowing people to own their own genomic information. There's another one called Project Chavon that's doing the exact same thing, where people will actually be able to own all their health and genomic data, and then as companies want to use it for research or for advertising, they can actually pay you for access. So similar to what came out in the press or during the Facebook is, who actually owns the data? When you give up your data to Facebook, or when you're enacting, in essence, a lot of people have opted in for this, that they get to use the data for certain things. There's a shift now into pushing that control back to the user, and there are tools now that allow you to now control how you may monetize it as opposed to like a company monetizing the data. And that's very freeing because it allows a democratization to where you can now do things like micropayments, which are important. Go to you and then we'll go up there.
Okay. So thank you very much for that. It was very well put together, and I was able to understand a lot of what you were just mentioning here. My question is in regards to the standard curve that you showed of the laggards and then the innovators.
Mm-hmm.
I was wondering what your thoughts are on if it's possible to navigate through different stages of that standard.
It is. He's asking, when Simon was talking about the power of diffusion, or the laws of diffusion, where you have early adopters and then laggards at the back end. Is there any way were you asking about how you kind of change that or influence that dynamic?
I guess.
Because part of the way you do it, so the early adopters, the reason it was so important for the early adopters is if you go back to the power of storytelling, if you go back to the early Apple campaigns, the 1984 and Think Different campaigns that they produced, those were quite revolutionary, much more so than people originally thought. And the reason is they never once mentioned the product. That was highly unusual to have an advertising campaign where you actually weren't selling the product. You were actually selling what the product represented. And that's what was kind of groundbreaking and revolutionary. It was very much a David and Goliath kind of thing where they said, if you feel you're the little guy up against the big establishment, this is the product for you. So that's how I got the early adopters, is they made people identify with their mission statement, that we're the little guy taking on the big guys. In this case, they had the big behemoth, Microsoft and IBM that they were going after. So that's how you get the early adopters, is by appealing to their sense, one, of fair play, but also by that you've now said, wow, we know you, we understand you. We've actually built a product for you. These other guys haven't. If you're inside of a large corporation where they're going to tell you what technology to use, you're probably not for us. But if you're the kind of guy who makes your own decisions, we've got the product for you. So marketing, messaging, storytelling is really important for the early adopters. The storytelling is also important for then the ones after that, because once people begin seeing that they're not the only ones, there's a wonderful little video that's really short that we use in some of our classes, and it's called, I'll probably get this wrong, I thought it was called How to Start a Movement, but I'll tell you what the video is. It basically looks like, it's like at a rock festival, where it looks like there's literally, there's one person who's just dancing on a hill, and it looks like she's on drugs or something, and she's just kind of free-flowing, she's got her dress, and she looks crazy. And most people are literally just standing around just watching her, going, there's a crazy person. And then while she's dancing, another person comes and joins her. But to be honest, it looks like two crazy people. What's interesting is that once the third person joins, they validate the movement and the movement tips. So remember he talked about a tipping point? In a lot of movements, in this case it was that. It was the third person that tipped the movement. Because going, one person's crazy, two people might be crazy, three people is not a crazy. Three people is now a group. And that group has now validated that and they've tipped it. So that's what everyone's looking is how do you tip the movement? One is you're going to hear investors actually asking for what your traction is. And they'll also use words like viral, which is how quickly are people coming onto your train. And even if you haven't hit that tipping point, if they see the momentum moving in that direction, they will be quite likely to do it. An example of a UCSD technology that came out of UCSD Neurosciences. There was a physician as well as a graduate research student who had found a way of stimulating the vestibular nerve for weight loss management and appetite suppression. They had done some nice published work around it. They ended up building a product that sits on your head and can get attached. Turns out the FDA doesn't require approval for this because it's a consumer device and it's non-invasive. They decided to test out the marketplace, the traction, by creating a crowdfunding campaign. Now, this is a product that costs, even at low quantities when they were manufacturing the stuff, approximately $80. That's just ballpark of what it cost them to make. So they said, we're going to charge $250 to see how many people are willing to buy this. Now, we haven't even manufactured a single item yet. We just want to gauge interest. That would people be interested in such a thing? Their crowdfunding campaign began ramping up so quickly, they said, whoa, whoa, whoa. We probably aren't charging enough. This is moving too quickly. Let's push the price to $500, $499 to see if people want this. It kept going up. And originally they were trying to raise $50,000 to validate their business model. They're at a little over $2 million for revenue. That's a way of establishing that trajectory that then gives investors and said, no, this is moving in the right direction. Now, intuitively, you can imagine that people would say, yeah, it kind of makes sense that people want to lose weight and appetite. But this is actual data that shows that people are willing to create a sense of urgency. Remember we talked about timing being one of the ambiguous factors of making an investment decision? The question is, how do you create that sense of urgency? When we say why you, why now, and who cares? The why now is really, really critical because if we don't get a sense that we have to invest absolutely today, we're going to wait. We almost assuredly will wait till you have one more customer, one more piece of data, one more confirming study, something that's happening. But once we see that sense of urgency, something else kicks in, which is the fear of missing out, the FOMO. That's one of the greatest motivators. We hate to lose out on great opportunities. And then people kind of pile on. Someone up here was asking a question?
So when you start pitching for the investors, is it generally expected that you already have set and secure suppliers, raw materials, and channels, or is it okay to just assume and what happens if we change later in the middle?
It's an excellent question. It depends who you're presenting to. As you can see during the week that when we talk about investors, it's really critical to make sure you figure out which investors you talk to because there are some investors who are going to want to see validated businesses. They're only going to want to see once you have suppliers, customers, including your whole team already identified. There are going to be other investors, particularly who are comfortable early on with you just with a really solid idea with a lot of your assumptions worked out. And you say, we want you to help us start and grow this company. And a number of the companies I've been involved with the UCSD have been exactly that. There was another company out of UCSD that's doing quite well. It was a combination between folks from the visual arts department and the nanoengineering department who'd come up with a really interesting solution, and they'd been winning all these business plan competitions around San Diego, and were feeling pretty good about themselves, and they had applied to a number of incubators here, and one of the incubators said, thank you very much, but you're not a fit for us. And they were like, well, why? And they're saying, well, we don't think that the product you're making really has value in the market. We just can't see that people need this. This is kind of a nice to have, not a must have. Thank you very much, but that's our opinion. And they were quite dejected. And when we were talking to them, what we realized, I had had a conversation with them, and there's a wonderful quote attributed to Eleanor Roosevelt. It says, you never give someone the power to say no who never had the power to say yes. So very often what it is the only people that matter in these kinds of conversations or decisions are the customers. What do they think of your product? And so what we told this company is, don't waste your time talking to all the wrong people who really can't validate whether you have a good business. The only people who can validate whether you have a good business are the people actually who are going to be using and buying your product. That's what matters. So let's set up a meeting. And so we set up meetings with them, with the head of analytics for the National Institute of Health, with Novartis, with a number of other companies. And we said, what do you guys think? And they said, we like this, we'd like to buy it, let's form a partnership. At the end of the day, that's what matters. So we're not worried about whether it's too early or too late. So in this case of this company, they were able to come before any of that was all put together. And we said, I don't know, let's spend a little effort to figure out if people really like this or not. Let me help. So in this case, the investor was able to say, let me help by making some introductions to people in my network, and we're going to find out pretty quickly if this has legs or not. And then once we get that answer, then we'll know how to proceed. So if some people are willing to take that kind of risk, we did that with another company in our portfolio that was very, very early, and it was technology out of the US Navy, and we just really liked it, and we invested in it before they even had a product, just because we liked the intellectual property, we liked the people associated with it, and we're saying, let's help you try to build this. So again, when you're pitching to investors, the most important thing is to really find the right investor for the stage at which you're pitching, and you have to understand who you're pitching to. And that'll be the 4th or 5th week that when we talk about finance on that. And that one's going to be, a lot about how do you determine who you're going to, which investors to talk to, how do you find who they are, what questions do you ask them, what are they going to ask of you, all that kind of stuff.
Thank you. I have a two-part question.
Okay.
One is there somewhere you can find a story canvas? The structure of it, it's different. Gotta be different than an elevator pitch, right? So one is, what's the source, and is there a story canvas? The second is also another resource question. Where do we find information on how much to give to investors? What percentage of the business do we turn over to them?
That'll be a question for the finance week, the second one, because it's more art than it is science. There is some science to it in terms of there are some certain fundamentals, but again, when you're working with early pre-revenue startups, there haven't been any manifested signals, and so it's really hard to place valuation. So valuation can be placed based on what other companies at similar stages have achieved, or if you have some true intellectual property, you can try to put a value on the intellectual property. Or if you have early interest, like this other company did, where they were beginning to sell this product and they had confirmed revenue, you can place a value based on that traction in the revenue. As far as the storytelling canvas, Pixar has open sourced a class that's online that I think you can take for free, that's all around storytelling. And so it's not a canvas per se, but it's using their methodology around it. And some elements of it have storyboarding attached to it. One of the exercises we do, again, because of the shortness of these classes that we do for storyboarding your idea, is we have one person, and you may want to do this on your team, we have one person sketch their idea for a business in a series of frames, like a journey. And then what they do is you're not allowed to use any words. You can only use pictures. And it doesn't matter if you aren't good at drawing. I'm the absolute worst drawer. I have trouble drawing stick figures. but you draw them and then you hand the paper to someone next to you and you have them interpret what you've written back to you. And it's a it's a great conversation starter, but it's also a great way of understanding, because very often words get in the way of what we're trying to communicate. And so when you can get back to the basics of what you're trying to do, it can be very, very powerful.
So let's say you have a solid idea and what you're trying to sell is a service, not an object. How do you validate that, and how do you collect proof in front of the investors if you don't have any object, any items that you're going to create with just a service?
Some of the best innovations are service or model innovations. The way you do it, by people actually using it and validating it. That's how you determine the value of it. Are they using it? It's tough when you're going to sell the concept of a service to somebody. There's still going to be signals, things like economics. How much does it cost them to purchase the service? And how is that in line with what they were paying before? So we talked about switching costs. We talk about competitive sourcing. And also, does it allow them to, do they have a way of measuring the outcome? In other words, if they use your service, they get a better result at the end. You're going to have to somehow demonstrate that, doing some trials of some sort. They don't even have to be overly professional trials, but you have to somehow test your hypothesis, at least to the satisfaction of an investor. Unless you happen to be able to find an investor who has experience in that area, who will intuitively get what you're saying. Because when you think about it, even things like Skype, as much as it is technology, it's actually a service to offer, free phone calls over IP. So somehow there were a set of investors who found the argument an intuitive argument. I could see how people could want this. Free is better than paying for something, and to make long distance phone calls over our computers makes a lot of sense. Go here and then up there.
Kind of want to go back to the business model.
Mm-hmm.
So after that, you can have different consumer segments. For example, if I have a shoe that prevents you from falling, I can sell it to little kids, or I can sell it to seniors. Like there's two different consumers. So do you create multiple models, or do you interconnect? How would you answer? How would you go?
Couple ways. One is you could look at those as two different segments you can attract, because in every business you don't necessarily have to have just one customer segment you sell to. You could have multiple customer segments for exactly the same product. The other one is you may want to create two canvases, put them side by side and say which one makes more sense, particularly if they aren't complementary or synergistic. But it sounds like in the case, or let's say you create a shoe that can be sold to seniors or to small children. Let's say it's an easy lace system to where seniors don't have to spend time trying to lace their shoes if they have arthritis, but kids also don't have to lace them because they just don't know how to tie their own shoes. In that case, let's say it is a lacing system, you could put them both down under the same business model, and then you could do an analysis of how do we test which market is better for us to go after, where the economics are better, where our competencies lie, where we get better traction, better profitability, and you may want to sell into one market and then the other, or you may consider them as two separate.
Thank you. So a quick question concerning larger companies. So what is your take on businesses who choose to put customers first versus creating like a healthy team of like employees? So it's kind of like in the video or actually in your lecture where we talked about getting along with people who believe in you and with the same belief system. How do you weigh that? Like, what's more important to the business? Is the customer more important, or taking care of your employees? Which is healthier for the business and why?
Well, what's healthier for the business is always to have happy customers who are going to buy, because one doesn't exist without the other. The question is, I don't see it as an either or, it's a yes and. I think you need to have both. And I think great operators of companies know how to look after both the internal culture of an organization, because the internal culture is a reflection of their external culture as well. Hopefully there's not a disconnect between what they tell the rest of the world they stand for and what they kind of practice internally. So you need to build strong culture internally, and one of the weeks we're going to talk about company culture and personal culture. Dan Negroni will be giving that talk on teams and leadership and personal. But you absolutely have to be obsessively customer focused. At least as entrepreneurs, as investors, we're going to want to see that you have a healthy culture, because you can't build a company if no one will work for you, or no one likes you, or it's divisive, or it's dysfunctional. That just is a no-go, which is why we, as I said, that second bucket was, I have to believe in you and your ability to build and surround yourself with great people, but you have to be obsessively customer focused. When I ask you, what keeps you awake at night, if you tell me that nothing keeps you awake at night, we're not going to get along very well. Because I'm going to want you, we have what's called productive paranoia. We want you to be just so paranoid that you're certain that there's people trying to disrupt your business, steal your customers, steal your employees, just something that keeps you, but you turn it into a very positive attribute, that you find it to propel you forward and make you even better for what you're doing. Excellent. Oh, we do have another one.
Just a question, like a recommendation actually, on like material for us to look at like psychology of consumption, like what triggers people's emotions to want to consume stuff. Is there like any good source we should be looking at? Like this seems to be like the most important stuff.
Yeah. Vidya Dinamani, who comes and often lectures for us around customer discovery, and that will be a better person to give you some of those sources for the psychology of consumerism, what happens. I'll think too, between this week and next week, in terms of resources I can think. We've actually built up a resource library too for entrepreneurs that has lots of, from these classes that we've taught, that have a lot of the templates, wonderful articles, and we make those available usually towards the end of the class, but I guess there's no reason we can't make them available sooner, and they're just ways for you to kind of explore. Some of the things are going to be relevant, a lot of them probably won't be relevant, but they're all available for you to explore. Everything from templates about doing financial modeling, to how to read term sheets, to how to negotiate, to how to build teams, all these little things that we just don't have time for in the class, but will still be quite useful to you. And I'll look and see if there's anything in there on the psychology of this stuff. Sorry, just had a journal to my left.
Thanks. I have a question that is more like a curiosity. In many opportunities I assist to this kind of events, partnership events, and I notice that most of the time there are more women than men. And that's kind of funny, because in the real field, I mean the business field and the predator and the startups field is led by men. So I would like to know if, in your experience, do you think that there is something that stop women to be as successful as men in the business and apprenticeships fields? Thanks.
So what we find is in healthcare, we find females very well represented as executives in a lot of healthcare companies. It's in the technology, particularly engineering focused ones, that we see fewer. As far as an opinion, I'm not an expert on this. When I've read from other people who do study this, they say one is sometimes the self-confidence aspects of it, that intellectually, that women will come into some of these classes and gather a lot of this knowledge, but when it comes to actually going and starting it, sometimes there's some self-doubt about it, or it's also finding the right resources and support networks to help them do it, which is why UCSD has been very aggressive in terms about creating resources to support women-led enterprises, everything from My Startup XX, is that what it's called? My Startup out of Rady, My Startup XX, but it's also, what's the one that Sylvia and Allison are doing?
Hera Labs.
No, not Hera, but it's a new incubator that Allison Long and what?
But they're focused on women.
It is, but Hera Labs is focused on women, and then there's another one that Sylvia and Allison Long and another colleague started, where they will accept you into the program. They will not only support, and it's only for female-led startups, but they'll also automatically give you a stipend. Just once they accept you, they give you money right up front for helping to start it, and then they will invest in your company on the back end if you meet certain criteria. So what's fantastic is that there's a number of these efforts that are trying to change that dynamic, because we're all very, very aware that we see the same thing you do, and we're trying to figure out why. And I don't know that I'm the perfect person to ask or answer that question. Well, thank you for making it. It's actually a good time because it's almost 8 o'clock. I'll stay for a few minutes afterwards if any of you have some questions that you don't feel comfortable asking in front of the class, or you just want kind of more kind of a one-on-one conversation. Happy to do that. We make all these presentations, these materials available to you. If you remind us, or I'll ask Deborah to remind us to also give you access to the entrepreneurship library that we have digitally, and let you do that. And thank you very much for hanging in there with us. Thanks.